Bonjour les élèves. Comment allez-vous? J'espère que vous allez bien. Aujourd'hui, nous allons étudier quelque chose très difficile, mais pas très difficile, ça va devenir très facile. Have you understood what I have said in French? So today we are going to learn something a little bit difficult, not that difficult. It will become very easy. The title of this lesson is Tu as visité la Tour Eiffel? Have you visited Eiffel Tower or did you visit Eiffel Tower? You know, Eiffel Tower is one of the emblematic picture of the city of Paris. So, from the title itself you can make out we are going to learn a new tense. Tu as visité la Tour Eiffel. So, now we are going to talk about a new tense that we are going to learn, which is called le passé composé. Le passé composé. So, we are going to learn le passé composé. If you remember, in our present course, we have done the present tense, le présent, l'impératif, the imperative, and now we are going to be introduced to a new tense called le passé composé. So, for example, I speak is je parle, then you speak is tu parles, he speaks is il parle, she speaks is elle parle. We speak is nous parlons, you speak is vous parlez, il parle means they speak, elle parle means they speak. So that is the present tense. So I'll just say it in a single go. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle. Nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. In imperative, the tense that we have learned in the last few lessons, by which you can give an order, instruction, advice, or a form of politeness. So, for you it becomes parle, for us it becomes parlons, and for you it becomes parler. For the formal one. Parler en français, speak in French. So, it's an instruction. Now, for le passé composé. So, what is passé composé? Let's get this point clear first. Le passé composé is the most important past tense in French. It corresponds to the simple past of English language. It may also relate to the present perfect. We form the passé composé using auxiliary verbs avoir or être followed by the past participle, that is le participe passé of the verb. It might not be that easy for you to understand. So, something you have to understand that in English we have two tenses which kind of relate to the past, what happened in the past. One is past tense, I saw Eiffel Tower, and there is another one, I have seen Eiffel Tower. So that you understand the difference between the present tense, past tense and present perfect. So present perfect is something which tends to have an effect even in the present. So I saw Eiffel Tower and I have seen Eiffel Tower, both are in the past. So these two tenses in English can be transformed into one single tense in French, and that is le passé composé. So, passé composé, how do you make passé composé? We were talking about the verb parler, means to speak, means to speak. So, now we are going to understand how we can construct passé composé. But before we go there, do you know what is an auxiliary verb? An auxiliary verb helps another verb to form a tense. Like in English, he has been gone forever. He has been gone forever. Here, has and been are the auxiliary verb. So, auxiliary verbs, they actually help the main verb to be in a form of a tense. For example, not for everything we have, like in English, see means to see, saw means something which you have seen in the past. So, saw doesn't have an auxiliary verb. But in passé composé, auxiliary verb is a must. And in French, the auxiliary verbs that we use, like in English we use have, I have seen, he has gone, you are done. So, similarly in French, we have être and avoir as two auxiliary verbs. So, in English there are three auxiliary verbs, to have, to be and to do, and some auxiliary words like will, would, may, must, can, could. In French, there are only two auxiliary verbs, avoir and être, and there is no auxiliary words in French. So, coming back to our main proposition of passé composé. So, for passé composé, we need an auxiliary verb to form it into that tense. So, speak is parler, and when I want to say I spoke to my professor. J'ai parlé avec mon professeur. So, here you can see normally in present tense it's je parle. In passé composé it becomes j'ai parlé. So, j'ai is the A is the auxiliary verb avoir, and parler with an accent is the past participle or participe passé. So, j'ai parlé means I spoke, tu as parlé means you spoke, il, elle, on a parlé means il a parlé means he spoke, elle a parlé means she spoke. On is another pronoun that we use often at par with il, elle, means which corresponds to it at times in English. So, on a parlé is it spoke. Nous avons parlé is we spoke. Vous avez parlé is you spoke in plural form or formal. Il, elle, ils ont parlé or elles ont parlé means they spoke. Now, just to clarify once again, so what we do, how do we make passé composé? Passé composé we make with an auxiliary verb. So, in French there are two auxiliary verbs, one is avoir, the other one is être. So, for avoir you have to conjugate it as in the present tense, j'ai, tu as, il a, elle a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont, elles ont, and then you have to add the past participle of the verb that you are going to use. So, we were working with this verb today, parler means to speak. So, it becomes j'ai parlé, tu as parlé, il a parlé, elle a parlé, nous avons parlé, vous avez parlé, ils ont parlé, elles ont parlé. So, now just before we get into more examples, I would like to tell you that there is this concept of participe passé, which is in English called as past participle. So, how do you get the past participle of the French verbs? So, for regular verbs, you know the regular verbs that ends with er, ir or re, the past participle is formed like aimer becomes aimer with an accent aigu at the end. If the infinite verb, the infinitive form, the root form, the infinitive form ends with ir, the participle ends with I, like finir becomes fini. And if the infinite ends with re, it becomes u, like ventre becomes vendu. So, these are the formula to make past participle of French verbs. So, aimer becomes aimé, finir becomes fini, ventre becomes vendu. So, here I am going to also give some irregular verbs just for your reference at this stage, and later on we will learn it more. So, venir becomes venu, tenir becomes tenu, devoir becomes dû, pouvoir becomes pu, vouloir becomes voulu, lire becomes lu, boire becomes bu, attendre becomes attendu, entendre becomes entendu, courir becomes couru, répondre becomes répondu. I'll go once again. Venir is to come. In English, the past participle of come is also come, but in French, venir past participle is venu. Tenir means to hold, it becomes tenu. Devoir means you must, that is, devoir is very difficult to translate into English. So, you can translate it as you must, devoir becomes dû, and pouvoir means can, that becomes pu. Vouloir means to wish, that becomes voulu. Lire is to read, that becomes lu. Boire means to drink, it becomes bu. Attendre is to wait, it becomes attendu. Entendre is to listen, it becomes entendu. Courir becomes couru, means to run, he has run. In French it's run, in English it's run, but in French it becomes couru. It's a different form in past participle. Répondre means to reply or to respond, it becomes répondu. So, I would request you to go through the list of irregular verbs regularly and to remember the past participle, because not only for passé composé but also for other forms of tense, you would require the past participle of these verbs. Faire, faire means to do. Faire becomes fait. Dire means to say. Dire becomes dit. Écrit is to write. Écrit becomes écrit. Conduire, to drive. Conduire becomes conduit. Conduit. And once again, I would request you, please be very careful about the spellings. So, faire becomes fait, dire becomes dit, écrit becomes écrit, conduire becomes conduit. Now, for passé composé, we are going to now revise a few verbs that we have already learned in our previous lessons. So, watch and watched. I watched television. Last evening, I watched television. Hier soir, j'ai regardé la télé. J'ai regardé. So, you can just try to repeat with me. J'ai regardé, tu as regardé, il a regardé, elle a regardé, nous avons regardé, vous avez regardé, ils ont regardé, elles ont regardé. So, it means I watched, you watched, he watched, she watched, we watched, you watched, they watched and they watched. So, with this we are going to go to another regular verb. So, these are the verbs which ends with er. So, these are regular verbs. J'ai aimé means I loved. J'ai aimé le chocolat. I loved the chocolate. Tu as aimé. Il a aimé. Elle a aimé. Nous avons aimé. Vous avez aimé. ils ont aimé, elles ont aimé. So, just to remind you once again, in case of il and elle in plural form, there will be a liaison. So, it becomes ils ont aimé, elles ont aimé. Then we come to the verb écrire. I wrote a letter to my father. J'ai écrit une lettre à mon père. J'ai écrit une lettre à mon père. Tu as écrit means you wrote. Il a écrit means he wrote. Elle a écrit means she wrote. Nous avons écrit means we wrote. Vous avez écrit is you wrote, either formal form of you or the plural form of you. Ils ont écrit is they have written or they wrote. As I was telling you, in passé composé can also be translated as present perfect, but we are going to retain the past form for the time being. So, ils ont écrit means they wrote, elles ont écrit means they wrote. Now, j'ai fait means I did, or it can also be I have done. J'ai fait, I did. Tu as fait, he did. Il a fait, she did, he did. Elle a fait, she did. Nous avons fait, we did. Vous avez fait, you did. Ils ont fait, they did. Elles ont fait, they did. So, now I am going to give you less and less translation in English, because as you see, it is not very obvious to be translated only in the conjugation form. So, now we are going to repeat it in French only. J'ai fait, tu as fait, il a fait, elle a fait, nous avons fait, vous avez fait, ils ont fait, elles ont fait. The next verb that we are going to learn today is conduire. Conduire means to drive. I drove is j'ai conduit. J'ai conduit, tu as conduit, il a conduit, elle a conduit, nous avons conduit, vous avez conduit, ils ont conduit, elles ont conduit. They drove from Delhi to Lucknow. How do you translate? They drove from Delhi to Lucknow. Ils ont conduit de Delhi à Lucknow. Ils ont conduit de Delhi à Lucknow. Now, the next verb is dire, is to say. J'ai dit means I said, tu as dit, you said, il a dit is he said, elle a dit is she said, nous avons dit means we said, vous avez dit is you said, and ils ont dit means they said, and elles ont dit means they said. So, the next verb that we are going to learn is lire. Lire means to read. J'ai lu, tu as lu, il a lu, elle a lu, nous avons lu, vous avez lu, ils ont lu, elles ont lu. J'ai lu le livre de Shakespeare means I read the book of Shakespeare. J'ai lu le livre de Victor Hugo means I read the book written by Victor Hugo. Tu as lu means you read. So you can say tu as lu la pièce de Molière. You read the play of Molière. For example, there is Elizabeth, Catherine, and Isabel, three female characters, and you want to say Elizabeth, Isabel, and Catherine have read or read the play of Shakespeare. So, how do you say? You say, elles ont lu. Elles ont lu la pièce de Shakespeare. The next verb that we are going to learn is boire. Boire means to drink. J'ai bu. J'ai bu du lait. I drank milk. Tu as bu means you drank. Il a bu means he drank. Elle a bu means she drank. Nous avons bu is we drank. Vous avez bu means you drank. And ils ont bu, elles ont bu means they drank. Another important verb that we are going to learn today is attendre. Attendre becomes in past participle. Le participe passé d'attendre is attendu. J'ai attendu Isabelle jusqu'à 8 heures. I waited for Isabelle till 8 o'clock. Tu as attendu, so I started once again. J'ai attendu, tu as attendu, il a attendu, elle a attendu, nous avons attendu, vous avez attendu, ils ont attendu, elles ont attendu. Ils ont attendu means they waited. Ils ont attendu le train. They waited for the train. Another similar sounding verb is entendre, means to listen. J'ai entendu means I listened. Tu as entendu, you listened. Il a entendu, he listened. Elle a entendu is she listened. Nous avons entendu is we listened. Vous avez entendu is also you listened in formal form or plural form. Ils ont entendu means they listened. Elles ont entendu means also they listened, as you know. They listened to radio. Ils ont entendu la radio. One verb that we are going to learn now is courir. Courir means to run. J'ai couru, tu as couru, il a couru, elle a couru, nous avons couru, vous avez couru, ils ont couru, elles ont couru. So, with this, we can say that now, along with the present tense, we can talk about the present time. With imperative, we can give advice, instruction, order, or we can also express a few polite forms. And with passé composé, we can also talk about the past. So, before we conclude this lesson, what I would request you all to find out the participe passé or the past participle of irregular verbs. Le participe passé des verbes irréguliers. With this, I wish you bon courage, bonne continuation, à la prochaine et au revoir.